On this Sunday night, from stuck at sea to home sweet home. The nightmare ends for a wave of Canadian cruise ship workers.
Screw this, get me out of here.
Why it took 7 weeks to get out. Concerns about Canada's meat supply. Fresh calls to change things up as COVID-19 takes down another facility. Fauci's new reality. The face of America's fight against the virus, now in quarantine. And delivering a very different Mother's Day.
It just takes every bit of ugliness and throws it away.
Creative ways to appreciate mom during the pandemic.
Global National with Robin Gill.
Good evening and thank you for joining us. Okay, so we've all been getting cabin fever being stuck at home during the COVID-19 crisis. For a moment, though, think about the Canadian crew members who've been stranded on cruise ships, some for more than 7 weeks at sea. The federal government advised against all cruise ship travel 2 months ago and has been working to get them back home, while dozens were repatriated today. Abigail Bimman has their stories on how they managed mentally to survive.
The COVID-19 outbreak on the Diamond Princess gripped the world's attention. As outbreaks and deaths increased on ships, countries rallied to get their citizens home. But it's been nearly 3 months, and crew members are still trapped at sea, according to The Guardian, 100,000 worldwide. Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister tweeted 75 Canadians arrived home this weekend.
In total, 56 days.
Holland America paid for a charter that flew Lynn Levesque and others to Toronto. She heads home to Fredericton Sunday after an experience so unusual, she and some colleagues plan to get tattoos one day.
We had built up some really strong relationship together, and we wanted to have something to have a memory.
In those last 2 weeks, I was very much like, screw this, get me out of here.
Hunter Peddle says he's lucky staff were allowed to sleep in guest rooms. And while he stayed optimistic, even in those nice rooms, self-isolation was tough by the end, with rumors flying and no clear way to get home.
I was making jokes like, oh, this whole us going to the Emerald Princess is plan T or U now. We're on plan 17. Every day it would change.
Things looked much different a few months ago. Peddle works in entertainment. To stay sane during social distancing, he kept working, now for his crew.
We just hosted a TV show for all of the crew. We do little call-in events, so we do little trivia. They'd call in for it.
The months-long ordeal didn't turn Peddle off from getting back on the job eventually.
Places I've seen, the people that I've met, the experience I've gained. I'm 100% going to go back.
Global Affairs is still tracking at least 200 Canadian crew members on some 70 ships worldwide. And despite the health concerns a virus presents in closed quarters, some large cruise companies are still planning to relaunch as early as August. Abigail Bimman, Global News, Ottawa.
Canada's 2 largest provinces are getting ready to reopen tomorrow. Ontario and Quebec have more cases and deaths than any other province in Canada. But the premiers say the time is right and they trust the public to be responsible. Starting tomorrow, the gates will open at provincial parks and conservation reserves in Ontario, but for limited use during the day only. In Quebec, the school bell will ring Monday morning, but it's not mandatory that students attend classes. Everyone is being urged to still keep their physical distance by staying 2 meters apart. And here's the breakdown of cases in Canada. Tonight, there are more than 31,000 active cases of COVID-19, with about the same number that have recovered. More than 4,800 people have died across Canada. Quebec remains the hardest hit province, with more than 37,000 confirmed cases and more than 2,900 deaths. Ontario has now surpassed 20,000 confirmed cases, adding 294 new cases in the last 24 hours. And more than 1,600 people have died in that province. A COVID-19 outbreak has hit another Cargill meat packing plant, this one near Montreal. The company says 64 workers, more than 10% of the facility's staff, have the virus. According to the union, everyone else will be tested by the end of the week. Work is now wrapping up at the facility, which is expected to temporarily close starting Wednesday. Cargill just reopened its beef packing plant in southern Alberta, where hundreds of employees became infected. One of them died. And that closure created fears about empty shelves in the meat department at grocery stores. Critics say Canada's supply chain isn't equipped for a crisis like the one caused by COVID-19. Ryan Kessler reports on the calls for an overhaul.
In some ways, pandemic measures at Pineview Farms look much like those at any other business. But the family operation north of Saskatoon is also doing something few are, hiring.
We know that to sustain this level of production, we need to add more people. So we're actually increasing our workforce by 10 to 15%. And if I could do more, I would.
Over the last 8 weeks, orders have doubled at the farm, which does everything from raising to butchering animals. They suspect the increase is partially because of public fear of meat shortages. The farm believes that wouldn't be a concern if Canada had regionalized production,
whereby you have a network of smaller scale plants centralized around large urban centers to feed those centers. And I think that's what we're starting to see as a potential new way of doing business.
2 Alberta meat facilities hold 70% of Canada's beef processing capacity. With more than 900 Cargill employees testing positive for coronavirus, the plant's shutdown has caused backlogs for farmers, higher consumer prices, and worries about meat making it to store shelves. According to the National Farmers Union, one solution is to reduce dependence on international giants and invest in smaller companies.
Now is the time to sort of secure a food system that works when there's a crisis.
A statement from the Federal Department of Agriculture and Agri-Food says increasing domestic processing is a key priority of a recently announced emergency fund. But one economist says it's not a matter of large versus small.
Is there an opportunity to perhaps diversify our processing base a little bit to reduce some of these risks? Yes.
But he says there are trade-offs, like higher sticker prices, which may hurt demand. Plus, Canada exports nearly half of its slaughtered beef and cattle.
And if we get too regionalized and more expensive, we might lose some of those opportunities.
And with Cargill's High River facility back online, he believes the system has bent, but not broken. Ryan Kessler, Global News, Saskatoon.
In the coming week, the country's crab and lobster fishery should be going into full swing, but many fishers are wondering if there'll be a market for their products. They've been pressing the federal government for financial support. They're also concerned about staying safe, a task that can be difficult in the cramped quarters of a fishing vessel. David Akin takes a look at the economic and safety challenges facing the country's 60,000 fish and seafood harvesters.
Jason Sullivan readies the Atlantic outlaw for this year's crab fishery.
I fish and crab about, I guess, off and on, like since I'm a kid, but, full time the last 20 years.
Before the pandemic, he thought he could fill his boat with crab worth $6 a pound. But now, Sullivan may only get $3 a pound.
Then you got your bait cost, which is $2.50 a pound, which is, so the price of bait is nearly as much as we're getting for the crab we're catching.
Whether it's crab, lobster, sea cucumbers, or other species, many harvesters might sit out this fishing season because it just will not pay. And then there's the challenge of keeping crews safe on a fishing boat.
So here, this is where we sleep. This is basically our bunk room.
Sleeping quarters for 8 are cramped below decks, and the galley is a tight squeeze if everyone's at the table at once.
It's just like a little camper, really.
Still, whatever Sullivan catches, processors are ready to buy it.
Our retail customers this year want significant increase in orders. So all of the orders we lost in food service, we've more than picked up in retail, and we actually have more orders now than we have product for the season.
And that means it's been vital for processors like Ocean Choice International to keep their plants running. And to do that, workers have to know the company is looking after their safety.
And that we took the action, in advance so that, we could operate safely.
Ocean Choice International has about 1,800 employees working in processing plants throughout rural Newfoundland and Labrador, and the company says every single worker has come back to the job for this year's fishery.
You know, if we want to continue to operate, we have to be responsible about our practices. We have to ensure people are safe and they feel comfortable.
Not only do workers have protective equipment, the plants have been reorganized to provide for social distancing, including the cafeterias. Workers even get temperature checks on the way into plants. Still, for those plants to be busy, fishers have to head out on the water in the days ahead, and it's still uncertain how many plan to set sail. David Akin, Global News.
And David will take a deeper look into the challenges facing the country's food producers later tonight on our special series, Coronavirus, The New Reality, with Donna Friesen. It airs at 7 p.m. right here on Global. The Chinese city of Wuhan, where the new coronavirus was discovered, has recorded its first new infection in more than 5 weeks. Daily life in the city began returning to normal in early April after a 2-month lockdown. The case in Wuhan is among more than a dozen new confirmed cases in all of China. That country reported more than 83,000 cases of COVID-19 since the initial outbreak began in December. Most were in Wuhan and surrounding Hubei province. Now, more than 4 million people have tested positive for COVID-19 globally. Many more have contracted the virus, but not everyone is tested. About 1.4 million people have recovered. The worldwide death toll, however, has topped 280,000. Russia has nearly 210,000 confirmed cases. New infections there are doubling every 11 days. In comparison, the UK, which has about 220,000 cases, new infections are doubling at a rate of every 29 days. But the United States remains the epicenter of the pandemic. It accounts for more than a third of all the world's cases, with more than 1.3 million. There's breaking news from Washington tonight. An official confirms U.S. Vice President Mike Pence is going to distance himself from others after his press secretary tested positive for COVID-19. But Pence is not self-isolating or under quarantine. He is following the advice of the White House medical team. He has repeatedly tested negative for the virus. But Dr. Anthony Fauci and 2 other members of the U.S. task force handling the pandemic are in quarantine now. As Jennifer Johnson reports, it shows how little control there is over the virus in that part of the world.
COVID-19 has reached the inner circle of the White House. Centers for Disease Control Director Dr. Robert Redfield, Food and Drug Administration Head Dr. Stephen Hahn, and the country's lead infectious disease doctor Anthony Fauci are all self-isolating. Further proof of how difficult this virus is to control.
We have to understand that we're riding this tiger, we're not directing it. This virus is going to do what it's going to do. What we can do is only nibble at the edges.
Fauci and the others will now have to testify before a Senate Health Committee this week via video teleconference.
When people do get exposed to the virus, if they know it, they should self-quarantine to protect others from getting it, and that's the process we've been doing from day one.
Last week, 2 people with daily access to the West Wing, Katie Miller, Vice President Mike Pence press secretary, and one of President Trump's valets, who served some of his meals, tested positive for COVID-19. That forced major changes.
The president and I not only will be tested every day, but I think everyone that comes into contact with the president will be tested every day.
White House staff are now reportedly wearing masks, but no one at a joint chiefs of staff meeting Saturday with the president had one on. Meanwhile, as Americans grow restless and more stay-at-home orders are relaxed, new outbreaks are emerging, including one in Pasadena, California, stemming from a large birthday party. Large gatherings are still not allowed under that state's rules.
I extend caution to other families that think, well, we got this, this is behind us. It's sadly and tragically not.
Other governors who have reopened their states are being forced to take drastic actions. All city beaches in Naples, Florida have been ordered to shut down again after people refuse to socially distance themselves. Lawmakers still fearing this virus, even as some Americans do not. Jennifer Johnson, Global News, Washington.
Coming up, Britain's new alert system as it eases some lockdown rules. The clubs are closed, but the beat goes on for partygoers at this drive-in rave in Germany. DJs pumped out the music to the car-bound crowd. Socially distant dancing was allowed with no more than 2 people per vehicle. Last month, Germany began gradually easing lockdown restrictions, but infections are now rising. Spain is guardedly optimistic about the latest death toll. In the past 24 hours, 143 people have died, but the daily death toll hasn't been that low since March 18th. The daily caseload is trending upwards, though. More than 800 people tested positive Saturday, up from 721 on Friday. Tomorrow, more than half of Spain will move into the first phase of lifting some lockdown measures. Gatherings of up to 10 people will be permitted, and people will be able to travel within their own province. Bars, restaurants, and stores can open, but fewer customers will be allowed in. Museums, gyms, and hotels will also reopen. Two of Spain's biggest cities, Madrid and Barcelona, remain in lockdown. France is preparing to relax its lockdown tomorrow. After 55 days, shops and schools and libraries will reopen, but restrictions remain in most of the country's east, including Paris, due to a higher risk of infection. There are more than 136,000 confirmed cases of COVID-19 in France, which has suffered one of the worst death rates in Europe. Britain has a new COVID-19 alert system to chart Britain's progress during this pandemic. Today, Prime Minister Boris Johnson detailed the 5 phases. Level 1 indicates COVID-19 is no longer present, while Level 5 is the most critical. Johnson says the UK is currently at Level 4, so there is still a way to go, but by following those guidelines, the government will be able to gauge if more severe or relaxed measures are required.
That COVID alert level will be determined primarily by R and the number of coronavirus cases, and in turn, that COVID alert level will tell us how tough we have to be in our social distancing measures.
And Johnson says if all goes well, shops and some schools could reopen in June. Still ahead, why whales are thriving under this pandemic. COVID-19 could end up helping the future of endangered marine life. The dramatic reduction in ocean traffic is providing an unprecedented opportunity for researchers studying killer whales. As Linda Aylesworth explains, it could even help the orcas themselves.
As humanity continues to struggle through the COVID-19 pandemic, the world's oceans are experiencing a rare benefit: a significant reduction in marine traffic.
Anywhere from 20% for some deep sea cargo vessels, all the way up to perhaps even 100% for certain industry, tourism, cruise ships, whale watching boats.
And a vast network of underwater microphones, or hydrophones, in the Salish Sea is recording the result.
What we are experiencing right now is actually an unprecedented opportunity of a quieter ocean.
An opportunity for researchers like Dr. Lauren McWhinney, who studies the effect ship noise has on endangered southern resident killer whales.
Many of these whales in the southern resident community have never known a quiet Salish Sea. And so this could be the first time in many of their lives that they've actually experienced such a reduction in noise.
That's significant because along with pollutants and the scarcity of Chinook salmon, their favored prey, noise from both large and small marine vessels are their greatest challenges because it can drown out or mask their calls.
We do anything to reduce their efficiency or their ability to detect prey or communicate with each other. It affects how they carry out their day-to-day life functions, and it reduces their capabilities to hunt effectively.
Not only will this respite from underwater noise help the whales, it'll allow those hydrophones to record their vocalizations clearer and farther than ever before.
And detection is so important. We need to know when the whales are here and what they're doing when they're here and how they are vocalizing. So this is the type of data the information we can get.
Linda Aylesworth, Global News.
Up next, the creative ways Canadians are taking to thank their moms on their special day. With the vast majority of Canadians physical distancing because of COVID-19, this Mother's Day is heavy on phone calls and light on embraces. That hasn't stopped us from finding new ways to express gratitude to the women in our lives, especially if they're on the pandemic's front line. Here's Ross Lord.
With pandemic restrictions preventing traditional family gatherings, Mother's Day bouquets were dropped off not by grateful sons and daughters, but by delivery drivers at a safe distance. Unusual arrangements that still pack power. Just ask mother of 7, Rose Adams.
It just takes every bit of ugliness and throws it away. Gives me beauty. And you need beauty in your life.
Canadians are finding other ways to show moms they care. At this long-term care home in Calgary, volunteers put on a special dance performance for elderly residents who can't see their families face to face.
My mom loves watching us dance, so we thought other moms are probably feeling really lonely.
I just love little kids, and the 2 little girls in bed, they're fantastic.
Canadian mothers are contributing more than ever. Many frontline healthcare staff in the pandemic are moms. So are many provinces' chief medical officers, offering poised leadership and reassurance during a frightening time. Making a full payback is difficult. It's not like last year when football star Russell Wilson gave his mother a house, sealing the moment with an embrace.
You for real?
We love you.
It's going to be tough not to get a Mother's Day hug, actually, this year. I think that's probably the one thing that I'll miss the most.
Nova Scotia mother Anne Melanson is just glad her 2 children are safe, including Ian, who was stranded with friends in Peru until she and other mothers lobbied to fly them home.
I have to say there was an awful outpouring of compassion, especially from some of the mothers that I dealt with who were, senior aides to MPs who worked in politicians' offices, and even some of the members of our government themselves.
Plenty to be thankful for on an unconventional Mother's Day. Ross Lord, Global News, Halifax.
And happy Mother's Day to all the moms out there, including my mom. That is Global National for this Sunday. I'm Robin Gill. We leave you tonight with Canada snowbirds. They took off again this morning for a flight from Toronto to London, Ontario. It's another leg in their cross-country tour to inspire hope during these uncertain times. Thank you for watching. Donna Friesen will be back tomorrow. Good night.